Welcome back. As you may recall from earlier today, I am Angie Van Squik, Court Administrator for the Breckenridge Municipal Court in Breckenridge, Colorado, and a current NACM Director. I hope you had a pleasant break and are ready to go in today's second session. Before we begin, a couple announcements. If you are not currently a member, you can receive your first year's membership at more than half off during the virtual event. Click on the membership button in the lobby. Are you enjoying the sessions? Tell your colleagues. Through support from SJI, all sessions are complimentary, even for our non-members. We also encourage you to tweet using hashtag NACM2020AC. Today's second session, Racial Diversity, American Courts Taking the Lead in Healing, is live and will focus on why courts should be concerned about current unrest over racial disparities, excessive force, and perceived lack of dignity and respect for persons of color. Our panel will discuss these issues and offer examples of what is being done to combat them. Will Simmons is the District Court Administrator for the 6th Judicial Administrative District Superior Courts of Georgia. He has served on the NACM board since 2009 and is our immediate past president. He is also the past president of the Georgia Council of Court Administrators. Martin Hoshina is the Administrative Director of the Judicial Council, the policy-making body of the California courts. In 2019, he was appointed to the Board of Directors of the Conference of State Court Administrators and currently serves on the National Task Force on Fines, Fees, and Bail Practices. Justice Montoya Lewis is an Associate Justice of the Washington State Supreme Court. She trains judges and others on implicit bias, Indian Child Welfare Act compliance, and best practices in child welfare and domestic violence cases. She is also an enrolled member of the Pueblo of Isleta. You may leave comments or ask questions during the session. The comment area is located about halfway down the page on the right. Enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Angie. Greetings, NACM. NACM members, our partners and friends across the country and across the world, wherever you are. We want to welcome you to this virtual live recorded session. And we're so grateful that you have joined and to be a part of it. As we begin, I want you to know that you can scroll down if you have any questions or comments throughout this session. Toward the right, there's a comment section that you can type in a question and ask us if you have any questions throughout this session. This session is entitled "And Justice for All," intentionally, which is all encompassing of so many things. And it's a two-part discussion. But first, I want to thank my newfound friends, Crystal, Martin, and Justice Lewis, for being a part of this. NACM thanks you. I thank you. We've been conversing for a couple of weeks here now, and I can now call you all friends. So thank you for being a part of this. We really appreciate it. So to the NACM and partners and friends around the world, this is a two-part discussion regarding injustice for all, and it deals with diversity and inclusion in the courts. We're going to start with it from a two-part aspect. So the first part is, let's recognize what's going on around the country with the protests, the civil unrest, the recent occurrences across the country. And from a court perspective, from where you all sit, Crystal, Martin, and Justice, how do you feel this impacts the court and the perception of the courts as a result of what's going on across the country? The second part to our viewers will be what courts are actively doing, what we're actively doing now to include diversity and inclusion in our justice court systems. And the panelists will share with you what they're doing, not just what they say, but what have actively worked in training and toolkits and just from a justice perspective. And so I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be a great conversation. Again, please ask us questions as you have them, as they pop up. So let's get right into it. Again, acknowledging what's going on across the country with what appears to be, folks of minority and persons of color across the country. So Crystal, let's go to you, and from your perspective where you sit, you have many years in the courts. and from where you sit, and also as a NASDA representative, regional director. How do you see this from a court perspective, and how does it impact us?
So thank you, Will, for inviting me. I am Director of Training here in the District of Columbia Courts. So of course we are here in the seat of lots of the protests going on. The District of Columbia Courts is a very diverse court, probably one of the more diverse courts in the country, as well as the demographics in our city. Very, very diverse. We take that very seriously, so seriously. In fact, our court's vision is open to all, trusted by all, and justice for all. And so with that, we realize as courts, we're part of the community. We are not aside from the community, we are part of the community. And so that's very serious to us. We have to be authentic. We need to listen. We need to be attentive to what the needs are and realize that we are part of the community. So with that, we certainly offer lots and lots of training. And we've partnered with NACM, we partner with NASJA, National Association of Judicial Educators, National Judicial College, and of course, some of the more important trainings are procedural fairness, implicit bias. And with our courts, we make that mandatory training for the judges as well as every employee that comes through the courts. That is something that you get right through the doors because, let's face it, we all have some biases and we need to be aware of them. We cannot wipe them out, but we have to be aware of them.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Ladies first, Martin. So I'm gonna go to Justice Lewis first, and I'll come back to you, sir. Justice Lewis.
Thank you. I appreciate having the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. You know, I share a lot of what Crystal said, and I think it is really incumbent upon leaders in the judicial system, and I think that includes Supreme Court justices, court administrators, heads of offices like the Administrative Office of the Courts, to really make this issue front and center of what we're doing in our court system. And as some of you are aware, the Washington State Supreme Court released a letter, now it's been about 6 weeks ago, talking about our court's complicity in devaluing Black lives over the course of the history of the state of Washington, and made reference to specific cases and made a commitment and sought the commitment of the broader legal community to addressing those issues as practitioners, as a system broadly, as well as individuals, judges and justices. And I think that that's a commitment that it was really important to come from the Supreme Court, and to not just make the commitment, but ask others in our community to join us. And following that, we've really set out to continue to have hard conversations with each other, as well as sort of in more public spheres, to talk about these issues and acknowledge the role the court system has played and continues to play. I think the longer we avoid those questions and avoid our own roles in the things that we are seeing people protest about, the less likely we are to really be able to have honest conversations that begin to build trust back in the communities in all of the communities that our court systems serve. So I think, one of the things that I really struggle with is why there is such resistance. And I think, we see that in lots of places, to having those hard conversations and acknowledging our roles within these institutions. because I think if we don't begin to acknowledge those things and have honest conversations and recognize those things, it is impossible for us to really begin to build bridges. And I don't say rebuild bridges, because I think with many communities, certainly with communities that I've worked in and come from, the bridges never existed. It's not about rebuilding, it's about building. And until we begin to really say that out loud, I don't know that we can say that we're really doing the work. The court that I come from on the Washington State Supreme Court is apparently the most diverse court, Supreme Court in the country. And that work of figuring out how to come to agreement on issues, figuring out how to move things forward, that is very difficult work when you have 9 people who are very committed to the things they believe in, very bright people, and for all of us to come to an agreement about how to do that, to move these conversations forward, it's very difficult work. And I don't want to sugarcoat that. I think it's really important to say these are hard conversations to have, but if we don't begin to really have them in frank, honest, difficult terms, we are not doing the work that I think the public is demanding of us in this moment.
Thank you, Justice, and I can appreciate your statement regarding that. It's not about rebuilding; it's actually building. Very, very profound statement. Thank you for your perspective, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Will. NACOM board, folks that are registered and signed up to hear this, I appreciate very much having the opportunity to address you today. I'm from California. I'm a state court administrator. I'm with the Costco organization, as some of you know, and I know so many of you. And so much of what I want to talk about is probably coming from that perspective. But I should also let you know it's also informed from a perspective of working in California's prison and parole system for about 15 years on really reducing prison populations and confronting the fact that it is actually symptomatic of what is happening here and what we are all starting to talk about again. The proportionality of the people of color that are incarcerated, not just in California's prison system and across the country, remains incredibly high. I come to the court system then to what I would describe as a little bit further up in the criminal justice system. And we all know that the court system has an incredible proximity to the criminal justice system, which is why I think we have to have these conversations, difficult as they are. And I couldn't underscore more what Justice Lewis is talking about, as well as some of the detail on how you get there in the work of Crystal Banks. But I want to, Will, if I could, into the 2 parts that you talk about, address it a little bit more philosophically for the moment that we're in, and in fact, the movement that we may be in. And then hopefully, time permitting, get a little bit more into the detail about what we can actually do and what we are doing about this. But I can't go further without saying that this is really, I believe, a moment of reckoning that is completely appropriate and overdue for the court system and the judiciary of the country, and in particular here in California. We have our population questioning right now, I believe, the rule of law. There's questions about the reliability and fairness of our system. And indeed, a legitimate question about whether justice is truly colorblind in this country. To have those questions come up at this day and age is really a remarkable thing. And I believe that you picking this topic, you driving this conversation, difficult it is, again, couldn't be more timely. I just hope that it's more than just a moment and that we can all be part of this movement. And there are questions even in our system, I think all across the country, about, well, what can we do and what is our role in terms of the courts in this? And it's not just about, I think, justice and judges and court administrators and court managers. It really is about everybody that is in this particular system, because the questions are about us and whether or not what we're doing is legitimacy. And I don't want to over dramatize it, but I don't think it can be understated that we are talking about the legitimacy of our government and our democracy that's predicated on 3 branches, and a reliance that there is fairness and there is justice, and you can get this in this 3rd branch of government in the way it's been designed. So with that, again, I don't think can understate the moment or the movement that we're in. We're doing an awful lot here in California. I'll just start with underscoring what Justice Lewis said, that it starts at the top, right? We have to have the leaders engage, difficult as that can be, to create an environment where we can actually have these conversations and we can get to work on these measures and open the door for the things that we can do. And again, I'm hoping throughout the remainder of the session, we can get a little bit more into the detail of the things we are doing or the things we can do and give some people some resources to go away with.
Thank you, Martin, and well stated. So let's get into what we're actually doing, what you all have done to actually implement diversity and inclusion and your systems where you are. What has Washington State done? Martin, what has California done as the state court director, and Crystal, what has NASJA, and in your capacity in various roles, what have you all implemented to help address some of these things? Because I do believe, although we're building this and not rebuilding, as Justice Lewis said, there are some courts across the country that have seen this way prior to what we see going on across the country. So if for our audience here, please share with us what are some of the things that were implemented. And Justice, if you don't mind starting us off with what the state of Washington has done.
Sure. I think there are a number of initiatives throughout our system that focus on increasing the diversity of the judiciary. I think it's foundational to our legal system that our judiciary needs to reflect the various communities that we serve. And so I see a number of initiatives throughout the state of Washington looking to address that issue. And then once I think we have new judges, and I think Washington is no different from many other states. We're having a very significant number of judges retiring and new judges coming in. And part of our commitment as a system is to ensure that those incoming judges have good and consistent training related to how bias impacts decision making in an individual sense, as well as the more systemic questions around disproportionality and the ways in which that plays out in the state of Washington. We do a number of projects related to looking at the data that demonstrate that disproportionality. And I think that's also very important, because I think individually it is really hard for us just as people to say, my biases impact the decisions that I make. That's a difficult thing to say. But if you can bring that data to support that viewpoint that our system impacts communities of color disproportionately, it gives it's a way to have to sort of take a step back and think about what we're doing as a system, why that's happening, and hopefully that's a way into individual people being willing to think about whether or not or how that's impacting their individual decision-making process. And then I also have to say that I'm really seeing from a student perspective, law students, as well as students in undergraduate schools, having what I view as a massive generational shift. When I was in law school, these issues were things that I discussed in my first year law class with, a handful of other students. It was not well received by the school. It wasn't well received from many in the student body. That conversation is completely different today. And I see students really having the expectation and the demand that as a profession, we get better at this and we address this. And I've had students really hold me accountable as a new justice to those questions. So I don't think this is a question that is something that this new generation of incoming lawyers is going to drop. I think it's going to be front and center for all of the work that they do. And so I have a great deal of hope with respect to that, because I think there'll be that will continue to be a real focus for them, no matter what area of law they're practicing in. But again, I think, as leaders of the court system, we have to continue to think innovatively about what it truly means to be a system that has legitimacy in the eyes of all of the communities it serves. And we have a long way to go to do that.
Yes, ma'am. And you mentioned something very interesting, Justice. You mentioned the massive generational shift. Mm-hmm. And I wonder, with that perspective and what you see going on with the law students now, does that impact implicit biases at all? And how this generational shift of younger lawyers or court professionals coming into our field, does that affect implicit biases, you think?
I think it has to. I mean, I'll give you what I think is a fairly concrete and simple example. When I talk to law students now, or when I participate with them in Zoom conferences like this, almost all of them don't just introduce themselves with their name, they also introduce themselves with their pronouns. And very often in their, where it has their name written, it also, in parentheses, it will say the pronouns that they're preferred to use. That is an example of a generational shift that for them is unremarkable, but for people that are in my age range was something that it would never have occurred to the vast majority of the law students I went to law school with to think about that and to view that as just a something that everyone ought to do. So I absolutely think that's going to have an impact on the way that those lawyers coming up are going to make decisions and think about their decisions and how they make those decisions. As I said, I think that I work with law students from lots of different law schools, and they all ask questions about how is the legal system going to be accountable to these questions that are being raised in the streets. And I think that absolutely is going to have an impact on how they make decisions. I see it having an impact on how they think about cases. I see it having an impact on the way that they think about the way their law schools work and the way admissions work and the way that admission to the bar works. So I absolutely think that that's going to have a ripple effect, and that gives me a great deal of hope.
Thank you, Justice. Thank you so much for that.
Martin. If I could, let me just piggyback. I was going to say also, Justice, in the generations, in their hairstyles and the way they dress, they are very independent-minded. Yeah. And so, of course, and it's a wonderful thing. We have to take notice. They're very independent, and they have value, and they know they have value, and that's great. Sorry, Martin.
But I think that that's really an important point, Crystal, because, when I was in law school, I had numerous people, from professors to people in the career office, tell me to cut my hair over and over again, that a professional haircut is a short, whatever, I don't know exactly what they were thinking, but certainly having, the traditional hair that I have was not seen as acceptable. And even 6 years ago, when I was applying to be appointed to Superior Court in the state of Washington, I had an attorney say, you have to cut your hair if you're going to do this. And if you're not going to do it, you need to put it up in a certain way that is, quote unquote, professional when you're on the bench. And this was someone who was very well-meaning. And, she believed that was the only way I would be taken seriously. And I took that to heart for quite some time, and then realized that I was going to be myself, and if that was not something that was welcomed, then that was kind of not my problem. But I do think that that's a really great example of the way our system is changing and ought to change. I think you're right. I think that generation of students demanding that.
Right.
Awesome. Thank you both. Hey, Martin, I know California is a very progressive state, and you guys have some things you've done to be proactive in diversity and inclusion. I'd like to hear from you about what type of thing you all have done.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share that with you all in the audience. And some of it is actually reflective or ties to the comments that Justice Montoya Lewis and Crystal just mentioned, because it tries to tap into the generation issue as we try and bridge it across, which is why I think what I was talking a little bit about, we have these moments, but I do believe it's more of a movement because I do see you're seeing the change as this generation seizes control of its version of American democracy. But let me get off of the philosophy a little bit and push it around to what it is that we're doing here in California. But it is what we've been talking about this morning is what do you do to have a bench that reflects its people, both in terms of look and feel and maybe responsiveness in terms of decision making, while being true to all of the principles of the rule of law and fairness and justice. And so we've been doing some work on judicial diversity in the bench. We recently did a refresh of something we call a diversity toolkit and the pathways to diversity. It's a resource that after we're done on this panel, I'll make sure it gets available to the folks that are participating in this conference, encourage them to go there. It's very rich, it's very robust, it has a lot of hot links. But it starts with something at least very powerful when you first see it. It'll be the image of seeing what the bench looks like demographically vis-a-vis and compared to California's population. So as a starting point, you actually see what we look like demographically by race and gender in the state, and then tracks it to, well, then what do we look like on the bench? What's great about it is because it needs to be more systematic, we also post the entire pathway that gets you there, which is getting into the composition of law schools. You can get into then bar passage rates, because of course becoming a judge is derivative of a lot of other pieces, and it needs to be looked at a little bit more holistically than just asking either governors or voters or houses of representatives or whatever the judicial selection process may be in your state. Well, what is the judiciary doing? It's fair to ask, well, what is everybody doing in this space? Because it's actually a pathway or a pipeline. And so I think it's very helpful, at least to start with everybody by really calling it out in terms of this is what it looks like in all of these sectors that lead to it. Well, then what does everybody do within this? And this is what the toolkit attempts to do. It puts together really outreach efforts. You'll see in there what a particular bar association or a region of California may be doing. You'll be able to see what a law school is actually doing. And you'll see the little resources and toolkits, sub-toolkits essentially that they have on how it is that they go about it to just, again, address that one part of the equation, which is, having a bench that reflects the people that it serves and how important that is. This is our effort in some respects in terms of outreach to make real what Brian Stevenson refers to as getting closer or getting proximate to your community. And extending yourself in there. And again, it goes to that legitimacy, public trust piece on the questions that are being answered. And it's not just that. We also then extend it into bias training at all levels, which are not just for judges. It's for everybody who works in our system, including myself. There's also things that for leaders to do in the frame of civics education. What's wrong with an investment to continue to remind people about the three branches of government, and keep pushing in that area. And there's a lot of work going on, I think, on the national level, state level, and local levels area. And again, another area that can't be ignored. And then I think you can get into big fundamental reforms. From a policy perspective, we've made a big surge to eliminate cash bail in California. Now, we did that in 2018. The bail industry responded by putting on the ballot, which will be in this November, a repeal of that law. And so we'll find out what the voters say about it, but at least using the leadership of the judiciary, again, we were able to ask these questions and push it because the concern is that cash bail results in inequality, not just in terms of wealth, but it becomes a social inequality, and it is in fact a race inequality issue. And so bail reform to us wasn't a criminal justice issue, it was actually a social justice issue that needed to be rectified. And luckily, our California legislature agreed, but that is where we sit. And we, again, encourage folks to get involved in that area and explore it. And I know so many states already are because I was on the national a task force on that. And there's a lot of energy there, and it should not abate, in my opinion. Another area is fines and fees. So many of the audience members know probably how we've become reliant on that as a system to fund courts and to fund other valuable, vital services in government in lieu of raising taxes or finding other revenue streams. The problem with that is we now know 20, 30 years, it's actually regressive, and it disproportionately harms people of lower income and people in communities of color. And so efforts should be made across the country, but we've been doing this here in our state to either eliminate or abolish fines and fees, but more importantly, use the courts to assess the proportionality of those and get judicial discretion back to measure it by somebody's ability to pay. If somebody can't pay, then the fine has to get right-sized. And right now, so many of these fines and fees are mandatory, and judges and court administrators really don't have room to move. And so in California, we've launched a lot of pilots in this area. We're hoping we'll continue to make progress and make a good effort to really restore proportionality and fairness in that area. I can go on, Will, but I mean, there's so much that I think people can do and should be doing. And we'll do everything we can in California to share everything that we have to answer this question of how, what, when, and what can we do to address this, because I think people are looking for ways to do this. And at the same time, we've got our eyes and ears open. We're getting a lot of things. California, sure, progressive, but we're also really behind on a lot of things. So let's be fair about this, and let's acknowledge the truth of it, which is what is so important in this particular moment.
Thank you, Martin. You mentioned so much, and actually you answered one of my questions I had, which is in regards to cash bail. So thank you for just bringing that up. And I just want to, before we go into Crystal or Justice, is there anything you want to add to anything Martin just mentioned?
So in Washington, D.C., we abolished bail many, many years ago, long before I came to the court. I've been with the court 15 years. And kudos, because of course, that is something that's very glaring in terms of the economics of most people of color. And one thing to certainly rope and tie them into the system when they need not be.
Yes, great. All right, great. So Crystal, while you're up, let's hear about what some of the things you've been able to assist with in implementing diversity and inclusion in the courts.
So I'll just say that in the words of Congressman Lewis, we try to get in good trouble as much as we can. And so with that, we really, our bench is very, very diverse. We have, I would say, probably half and maybe 40% African-American and white judges. We have a showing of Asian American Pacific Islander judges, Latinx, Hispanic judges. We have a good LGBTQ showing on our bench. We have a judge who uses a wheelchair. So from that perspective, of course, that exactly mirrors what we see on the outside of our court doors. And so with that, we've done many, many initiatives in our courts. We started a Building a Great Place to Work initiative many years ago, probably in 2011 or so, where we have made efforts every year to try to make sure that the community knows that the court is here to serve you. And so with this pandemic, on top of the protests in terms of racial injustice, we've now been doing a Leading with Empathy initiative. And that has been a real eye-opener, I think, for the courts, because we found, of course, like every other court, when we had to leave in March, we thought, okay, everyone can work from home on laptops and so on. And what we found is, of course, there are many, many experiences that our court staff had that we were not aware of. Vulnerable populations, many of them did not have Wi-Fi, many of them did not have laptops. And so we had to go about helping and ordering more and trying to get those on loan. We got hotspots, and we actually have barge centers around the city, balance and restorative justice centers, where if our employees or members of the community don't have Wi-Fi, they can actually make appointments, go to those centers, which are court centers, and use the computers there. Certainly over the years, we've done many conferences, both for judicial officers as well as the court staff. But specific to the judicial officers, I remember several years ago, we did a judicial conference where we specifically had pods where the judges acted out a poverty game. So if you were a family on public assistance and were given a certain dollar amount, you use that money, child care issues, healthcare issues, and you move from station to station so that they really got a good education in terms of what our court community is going through. We've done Raise the Power of an Illusion, The House We Live In. We did lots of discussion with respect to open dialogue in terms of each judge and how they grew up, their cultural background. And so that really builds a good understanding of everyone on the bench, everyone within the court community. We have lots of committees, probably like all of you. But on the committees is representation from every level, both the judges as well as court management, but also staff at every single level, staff each of those committees. And everyone has a say-so. So it's been a really constant learning environment. We're very proud of it, and we're always trying to do more.
That's great, Crystal. Thank you for that input. Any follow-up from Martin or Justice?
Yeah, I think I would add there's something implied or a thread in what Crystal is talking about that is part of potentially how we are looking at trying to reframe a little bit of the court system here in California, and probably every system needs to do it. But and again, I think it's implied in what Crystal's saying, which is this whole notion of being a little bit more holistic in terms of the approach to justice. And so when she mentions those sectors of education and moving people into those other areas and not just stopping at the boundaries of the law and the procedural things and just implicit bias aimed at us, but extending it out into the community in terms of health and human services and the like, you start to get a better picture, perhaps, and maybe starting again another set of questions in a conversation again about what is the recast, if there is a recast role of the courts, both to meet the moment and the movement of today, as well as projecting that into the future, as we've talked about the generation and the change and what may be the evolving needs, or the recognition finally that there's a big swath of unmet need out there that has not been tapped into. And so when Crystal, being an educator by craft, talks about those kinds of things, it gets things that can't, I don't think, be overstated, the significance of that and how that actually might just get extended even beyond the courts, and the courts can maybe extend themselves in the communities, not just to educate folks about ourselves, but in the same time, it can be a little bit more didactic, where the exchange happens and we end up learning more about the community. So, some of that is manifested in the outreach programs that you'll see, again, embedded in that diversity toolkit. It sounds like I'm pushing a product, but it's not. It's free. But it's incredibly helpful. And to the extent that courts and educators want to get involved in moving this into the community and setting it up, some of the do's and the don'ts and the helpful hints of how you might do it in the templates, are kind of there. And I get that it may be uncomfortable because I don't think it comes natural to judicial officers always. because of their role sometimes and their canons and their ethics can make things kind of uncomfortable for them. But it also at the same time presents an opportunity for those judicial officers that are willing, that can navigate the complexities of their position and their role and go out into the community, because it is very, very difficult. And I think that also needs to be acknowledged, that we call and expect a lot of our leaders and in our positions really expect a lot of our judges and our justices. But to be fair to them, they have some restrictions on them ethically that they have to honor. And they can't always be looking like they're choosing sides, but yet they have very, very powerful voices, and they have to find their own path to navigate it. And when they do, I find it to be incredibly inspiring. But I do, again, have to make sure that we all recognize that they do have some constraints, and yet they seem to be willing to push these big questions: bail, fines and fees, what is going on in the reckoning, what do we say about racial justice? And so, folks, if you didn't recognize it as a big deal, I'm here to tell you it's a big deal when they're stepping out like that and showing some leadership.
We also have lots of law days. Our judges actually do streaming hearings in some of the local law schools so that people can come out and see them. We have jury education programs within the schools, mentoring, tutoring. And so that is a good thing, because we want the community to see this variety of judges of every color, someone that looks like me, so that they are inspired to know that they can go to law school if they desire to. They can be lawyers and judges if they desire to. It's not just that you see one kind of judge and that's not me, so I guess that's not afforded to me.
Right. So I appreciate that. I appreciate all of you's perspective on that. So NACOM has recently had a podcast, and we have an ethics committee, and one of the most recent podcasts were on the protests that are going around the country. And as court employees, and here's the question we have, and that's why I prefaced it like this. Should court administrators recommend any special precautions or restrictions when a court employee wants to participate in a protest that supports racial equality? So speaking of ethics, Martin, and the fact that we're public servants and we represent the judiciary, what's your perspective on that? Are there any recommendations to that? Do you see anything wrong with it? Do you encourage it?
Well, I think the short answer is we encourage it, but we put a cautionary note to it, which is to be careful. And because the answer varies by what your position is and what your post is. And so starting again back to the judges and justices and then coming down to the employees, we recently had our Commission on Judicial Ethics offer an opinion to guidance to at least judges, and judges can participate. But the cautionary note was, but be careful, right? Because you may go to an event thinking the event is framed up with one perspective and one message, only to learn during the course of the event, because of the fluidity of these protests, sometimes that the look, the tenor, the feel, the appearance of it has changed. And this, of course, is problematic for decision makers like judges and justices. So it is also probably for executive level folks that have, like myself, are lucky enough to have these posts and then have voices and be able to use the voice as an opportunity for things. But then I think it might attenuate a little bit. And then there's, of course, the bright line between it's your own time. You're an employee, but you're not here at work, right? You've decided to either take time off or it's after hours and it's not in the workplace. And so our ability to shape, decide, and direct people attenuates, and it should. And so just like every resident in our state who just happens to be an employee, they are free to do what they wish to do. And to some extent, we would encourage folks to do that. But we do put a caution about how that might appear, because people expect impartiality, objectivity of their court system. And to the extent that you're part of the system, it starts to get a little bit complicated for you sometimes. I definitely am one who encourages folks that are young that don't have the entrappings of some of these positions to get out there and to do it while they still can, because I still remember I remember getting involved in an apartheid protest in Portland, Oregon, back in the day when I was a student. And I was lucky to have a professor that says, if you feel about it, go out there and do it. And he actually said this to me, and I've carried it and passed it along. Do it while you still can, before you get the entrappings of a professional career and a professional life. And so I've used that same philosophy to try and help others navigate as well as myself.
Great points. Justice, do you have an opinion about that? Court employees participating in protests for racial equality?
I do. And it sort of takes me back to this conversation I had 3 or 4 years ago with a group of judges at a conference. And, in the course of that conversation, there were a number of judges who said, we shouldn't do that, because we shouldn't participate in these kinds of protests or conversations even. I think the original discussion was around whether or not to participate in a town hall related to discussions about immigration policy, which is generally not something that would come in front of a state court judge. And one of the judges said, really, it impacts the perception of neutrality that we have as judges. And I really resisted that. And I said, probably in stronger terms than I'm saying it today, that, that person who was a white judge was imbued with the presumption of neutrality that I was not. And that is something that I've continued to see throughout my career, that there is almost always a question. As some of you may be aware, I'm involved in a retention campaign right now. I have an opponent, and very frequently I sort of ask this question about, well, how can you ensure or commit to the broader community that you represent everyone? That's not a question that I see being asked of white judges who were running for election. It just never comes up. And so the presumption is, because I'm a person of color from a very underrepresented community, that I might not be neutral, or I can't be neutral. I think, and so I think that's sort of foundational to the way I want to answer your question, Will, about participation in these kinds of events, because I think for many of us, it's not really optional to decide not to participate, to decide not to be a part of these conversations, because we really are talking about life and death questions. And to say, well, neutrality is more important than that, is to ignore the fact that we are not, the way these impact various communities is not neutral. And so I one of the things that I was sort of thinking about it as I was listening to this conversation, I spent 15 years working in tribal courts in Washington as well as in New Mexico. And as a tribal court judge, I didn't have the degree of restrictions I had as a state court judge in terms of being a part of the community and understanding where families who were involved in the court system, what their history was, what their role was in the community. Not only was I privy to that information, it was really expected that I had that information before I made rulings in particular cases. Whereas in the state court system, it was almost the reverse. I was expected to just know about the facts of case A, defendant A, and thinking about the broader questions about how they may have come to be in front of me was not something that was accessible to me unless they were part of a therapeutic court like a drug court. And that you know, so I've had both of those experiences, and my view is, just to sort of get around to answering your question, is that, you know, I think that it's sort of it's unfair to encourage people who work in our system, whether that's judges or administrators or people in the clerk's office, to participate in things like the Rotary Club, for example, but to discourage and say, well, there's really a question about whether you should participate in a protest that's happening out, you know, on the streets in response to current events. I agree with Martin that these things are fluid, and you certainly can begin to raise questions, and I think that's a legitimate concern to have. But I think the way we frame the question really sort of tells on us a little bit about how we think about these things. And, you know, I don't have the freedom, in my view, not to talk about how racism affects me and affects, you know, my daily life. I think that that's part of my job, to talk about that, because there are many people who don't have that experience and don't know that it exists, and sort of assume, well, you're a Supreme Court justice, so you don't have those experiences. That's absolutely not the case. You know, when I tell this story very frequently, but when I was a judge, a state court judge, I had a reserved parking spot, and I had people very regularly stop me. These are random people on the street, and question whether I knew that that was a reserved spot. You know, their assumption by looking at me was that I was parking illegally. The people don't necessarily look at me and assume that I have a role to have. I have tremendous positional power to address those issues, but the vast majority of the people that I see and that I saw in court as a trial judge, and that now I see in other formats, don't have that kind of power. So I have to be a voice for those people, because it's not a voice that's existed at all on the Washington State Supreme Court ever. So I just feel like, for me, it's I think those ethics rules were not written with a voice like mine in mind. And while I agree that I have to follow those, I think it's important to push back on those, because there are presumptions in those ethics rules that don't take lives like mine into account.
I agree with that.
I so appreciate your candor, Justice. You know, I have two wonderful, beautiful kids, right? And I've been working in the courts for over 20 years. It's all I've ever done. And I always thought that when I had children, I wouldn't have to have the conversation my father and mother had with me. But now at 16 and now I'm 13, I'm kind of having those conversations. And it's 2021. So everything you just said, I can completely identify with. And thank you for just being so completely honest with that. I don't know how you not have a voice in something like this. But to you, Crystal, because our time is getting near, your perspective on court employees participating in protests or what have you for racial equality.
So, of course, I will say, Will, certainly as an African-American mom, yes, we know, and all of us, we know we have to have the talk with our kids when they're going out to drive in particular. We always have to have the talk, and even more forefront now. And I agree with the justice, well, somewhere in between, actually, because it is, you hit it spot on. It's a question of privilege. That's why, of course, it wasn't contemplated that we would be in these roles. And for us to protest, it's a cultural thing. We can't not protest, but we're not going to show our court badge as we go down the street, right? So you're going to act accordingly. It's incumbent upon all of us to certainly represent in our cultural and our personal lives without bringing the court or any harm to the institutions that we serve professionally. I will say that that question's spot on. I have to give a shout out to one of my friends and colleagues, Tina Vigenis at the National Center for State Courts. She just sent me a video last week with this topic, and I would encourage all of you who are on this call to certainly look on the National Center for State Courts. It's a very short video that you can share with your employees, maybe 10 minutes, about this very topic, and it's very helpful.
Great. A minute and a half each. And again, we know this time does not do this subject matter justice, but as my education consultant, or our education consultant for NACM, is reminding me that this topic is going to be encompassing for our 2021 annual, which is scheduled for July 11th through 15th in San Diego, where this will be sort of a kind of a part of the theme here. So at that point, we'll dig more into it. But so we're looking for calls for proposals for those who are listening out there, watching us, that we're going to delve deeper into this subject for our 2021 annual, again, scheduled July 11th through 15th in 2021. So the call for proposals will be going out soon. Please look forward to it. But in about a minute's time, please, if you have any closing comments that you'd like to leave with our audience that are viewing, if you would please take the liberty to say what you'd like to say in closing.
Martin?
Any order.
Well, you know what I'll do? The candor and the inspiration of Justice Montoya Lewis that you just witnessed is exactly what we're talking about. Having folks ask these questions, be really plain spoken about it, and share their experience. And if that's coming from the top, it creates that environment that we're talking about, where the rest of us have more liberation and the ability to start to move and probe this. And to everybody's on there, I would not ask the question and argue for our limitations and our constraints, because those are arguments you just don't want to win. The answer to the question of what do we do is vast. There's a lot that we can be doing, and it's not just, again, at the top, and it's not just philosophy. Get into your recruitment, your hiring, think about fellowships, apprentices programs, subordinate judicial officers, how it is that you not just deal with diversity, but the other word we can talk about is the inclusion of it, because it's not just about that. It's how it is that you bring everybody to the courts can have a tremendous role in bringing together, and then but I think take back really a spot that it needs in this democracy, which is really a cornerstone to its legitimacy. And we need to resharpen our focus, our areas on this. And this movement gives us that opportunity, and we should seize it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Martin. Crystal?
I would just say that we constantly have to understand that everybody has a story. We all have a story, and it has value. Be kind, listen with intent, and be intentional, so that we can learn from one another, so that finally we can get past this and really embrace one another.
Great. Justice.
Well, I share what both Martin and Crystal said, and I think it is really important to remember that our job as a judicial system, as a legal system, is to be responsive to those stories. And I think there are lots of ways in which we can do that. But I think the most critical way that we have to do that, particularly as judges, is to be good listeners and to be responsive to the stories that people are willing to share with us. It is a tremendous privilege to sit on that bench and have people be willing to share what for many of them has been the worst moment or the worst day of their lives. And I think the longer we sit in these kinds of roles, the easier it becomes to sort of forget how important those days are for the people who are coming into the courthouses. And I think we have to really be cognizant of how terrifying it can be to be in those courtrooms. It's a place where I became very comfortable. I've been a judge for 20 years. Putting on that robe, it feels very comfortable. But before I went to law school, I had never met a lawyer, much less a judge. It's easy to forget how, I described it in some other context recently, that to me at that point, when I first started law school, lawyers seemed like magicians. Judges seemed like, wizards. I had no idea how they did what they did. So for people that are coming into our courthouses for whatever they're doing, if they're coming in to give a victim impact statement, they're coming in to be sentenced, they're coming in for domestic violence protection orders, I think as judges, we have to, and as not just as judges, but from the clerk's office, the person that does security in the building, all the way up to the judges, it is critical that we remember the context that we sit in, and this greater context that we've been talking about this hour with respect to the larger societal questions, for me, only sharpen the importance of remembering that and being responsive to that, and remembering what an honor it is to have people be willing to share those things with us.
Absolutely. And not only on the worst day of their life, whatever that incident may be, but there's also a psychological block in terms of minorities looking at courts as a negative, scary place from a generational aspect, because I think every family has been touched by some incident that may not have went well with the justice system or what have you. And so there's a psychological thing. And so our customer service as we greet people coming into our course is equally as important, in my opinion. But with that, I want to just say thank you to the State Justice Institute for sponsoring this session. Thank you for your support of NACM. I want to thank you, Crystal. Thank you so very much, Martin. Thank you, Justice Lewis, for just being a part of this discussion. The time did not do it justice, and we can talk about it all day. But we will continue this hopefully in July 2021. And with that, they're probably going to kick us off here. But thank you all out for watching and for supporting NACM. And we really appreciate you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Great to work with you.
Great.